Leaders. Questions. I call on Deputy Biddy Kelly.
Minister, the new central bank code favours the banks, and the balance of power is still with the banks with regard to repossessions. Now this new mortgage code is being published, and I think it leaves families all over this country who are presently in arrears in huge difficulty. It really is a charter for home repossessions. It favours the banks, and there is no independent oversight whatsoever. Minister, would you agree that banks, because of their impaired balance sheets and the pressures that they are under in trying to address their mortgage loan books, that they will become very aggressive in repossessions of homes? There is no independent oversight with regard to sustainable solutions, and if there is an appeals process, it is within the bank itself. Minister, would you agree that of the 90,000 families that are 90 days in arrears with their mortgages, that this code of conduct holds no hope for many of those families that simply are outside the protection of the code because they are outside the moratorium, and that banks will begin to get very aggressive from the 1st of October of this year because of this new code of conduct? We said that we needed an independent oversight, Minister, and we certainly believe that this particular code offers nothing other than favouritism to the banks with regard to repossessions. David Hall of the Irish Mortgage Holders Association said it was reprehensible that the central bank was rolling over and giving the banks everything they want. And FLAC have also said that they are disappointed with the new code as it favours bankers. Now, by any stretch of the imagination, Minister, and everybody would like to see a situation where there would be independence, oversight and monitoring of what is a fair and sustainable solution. I mean, reference has been made that families, are still watching Sky and not paying their mortgages. Minister, we have situations where families are now on the basic levels of sustenance with regard to food and shelter and heating.
Thank you.
They can't partake in society and they can't provide for their families in a sustainable way. And this particular code offers no solution and certainly no hope to the 90,000 families that are struggling on a daily basis to pay mortgages and live with some decency and dignity.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. I have to say...
Please. Sorry, Deputy.
I have to say, Deputy, as we listen to the Anglo tapes, they sound more and more like the vampire tapes. I'm not going to go into all of your history, but the issue there is that they've sucked the lifeblood out of this country, and you yourselves had a large element of responsibility in relation to that. You could come in and tell us what exactly you knew and when you knew it. But just let's move to the Code of Conduct. I think it's important to remember, first of all, the steps the government has taken since coming to office to address the situation. First of all, it started off in a situation where we have had an extended period of forbearance, and that has been extremely important in keeping the roof over the heads of families. And secondly, we have had a situation where the banks were initially in a set-up where they were going to kick the can down the road indefinitely. Now, it is not possible in terms of sorting out the finances of the country, getting the country back to work and to some level of economic prosperity to actually do that. And the Code of Mortgage Arrears and the actions by the government have been to continue the protection of families while setting in place mechanisms and measures which allow for sustainable debt resolutions for the very families that you speak about, and which I and every other deputy in this House understands are suffering and are having great difficulty. So the targets that have been set in relation to the principal banks and the covered institutions, that by the end of September they must provide sustainable mortgage solutions, starting with 30% of distressed borrowers. By the end of 2013, they have to have done that in respect of 50% of distressed borrowers. the targets will become progressively more demanding, so that the vast majority of distressed borrowers will have been proposed such solutions by the end of 2014. In order for this to happen, the Dáil here and the Seanad spent a considerable amount of time setting up the legislation in relation to the Insolvency Services of Ireland, so that there would be options in relation to certain borrowers who really have to have a solution. The situation is not long-term sustainable for them. And you quoted David Hall there, but I heard Mr Hall on Morning Ireland actually say himself just this morning there is no immediate risk to borrowers. This is a process which has to be engaged in for the recovery of the families involved and for the recovery of the country to a point where we have sustainable debt solutions. I thought that actually was the policy of your party.
Thank you. Deputy Kelleher, 1 minute.
Minister, you said the banks suck the lifeblood out of this country. You're now giving a code of conduct to the banks to suck the lifeblood out of families, because there simply is no independent oversight. You talk about sustainable solutions and resolution mechanisms, but it is the banks themselves that will actually decide what is sustainable. The family have no say in defending or arguing their case with regard to what is sustainable. It is the bank that will present a sustainable solution, in the bank's view. And that simply is completely unacceptable, that there is no independent evaluation, oversight and monitoring of what banks are offering with regard to sustainable solutions. Of course we want banks to provide sustainable solutions, but sustainable solutions for the families, not for the banks. And that is a difficulty with this particular code. It doesn't cater for families that are hugely distressed, under huge pressure, both financially and psychologically.
Sorry, please. Please proceed, Deputy. Your time is nearly up.
I would just like to remind the deputies that the election was 2.5 years ago.
No.
The solutions, and we're still waiting. We still have no solutions. I don't think.
You shouldn't respond to them. Will you stay quiet? Now, if you don't stay quiet, I'll suspend the House. This is nonsense. Will you please make your point? No speeches, just ask the question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Minister, you just don't get it. Like, there's 145,000 families in this country that are in mortgage distress. You know, and looking for scapegoats or pointing fingers is not a solution. Will you put your question, to those particular families that are out there watching this morning and hoping that some solution will be put forward. All I'm saying is, Minister, even at this late stage, is it possible to put something in place in the Code of Conduct that would at least allow independent oversight and evaluation of what is a sustainable solution and a resolution to families? Because it is sided on the banks completely. And everybody that any common sense will know that banks will become aggressive to repair their distressed mortgage loan books.
Can I just say that I would be concerned that the Deputy is attempting to unduly distress families who are already worried enough and who actually want a resolution of the difficulties which for many of them are now 4 years or more ongoing. And I think, Deputy, if we're seeking now, as I think we all are, you included, to help families in distress, I think you actually ought to have the courtesy to actually talk about facts and what the Code of Conduct provides for. It provides for a structured system over a period of this year and next year for families to engage with their lender so as to find a sustainable solution to their debt. Your solution, your party's solution has been, when you were in government, to simply kick the can down the road. Now, kicking the can down the road is understandable in the early stages, of a crisis. But it is not a sustainable solution if a family are so heavily indebted that they can't sustain where they're actually living. So what we have in the Code of Conduct Conduct and in the Insolvency Service of Ireland and indeed in the Mortgage Advice and Information phone line that my own department has provided is a series of mechanisms and steps for people who are in terrible distress about debt to actually get a resolution of it. Now, you're asking that the central bank would not, in effect, have a process, that it would be done Fianna Fáil's way, which is basically any old way. This is an actual process. Your way with the banks was any old way. This is an actual process to have the country and the distressed borrower and the distressed family to keep the roof over their head. What does that involve? For some families, for a small number, that may involve using the resolutions offered by the Insolvency Service of Ireland. I suggest to people who may be alarmed by what you're saying here this morning that if they haven't done so already, they should make contact with the telephone advice line run by my department on mortgage advice and information arrears. We also provide an independent accounting advice service when it's coming to the stage of a resolution where a family have to make a decision. This, above all else, like buying a house, Deputy, is actually a process where there are very important financial decisions to be made by the family, and the government has put in place through the insolvency services, through the mortgage arrears resolution process of the central bank, and through the Insolvency Services of Ireland, and through the Money Advice and Budgeting Service, a series of measures which are available to families to seek advice and guidance before they reach decisions which are critically important for their future and for their family home.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you. Deputy MacDonald, thank you. Thank you, Deputy MacDonald.
Gurmalgut Count Corla, and whether they're vampires or not, and sadly the characters that we listen to on these now infamous tapes are not fictional in nature, they're real. We can all imagine and appreciate the disgust, although not the shock, but the disgust on people's hearing the macho diatribes and exchanges between these individuals. But I think particularly for families that are experiencing mortgage distress, for the tens of thousands of them right across the state, I think their distress and disgust is all the deeper. To listen to Mr David Drum describe how he'd go down to the central bank with arms swinging and demand the moolah for his bankrupt bank is indeed revealing. We know full well that there'd be no option for any struggling household, any struggling family to demand moolah, to refuse to pay out the moolah, or indeed to pluck figures from their posterior. And therefore, Minister, I think it's all the more shocking that on the very same morning that we hear these revelations, that we're confronted with details of new code of conduct for mortgage arrears. Now, you say that this is part of a supportive process. I challenge you on that. What it does is abolish the previous limit of 3 contacts per month from banks to customers in arrears. In other words, it allows opportunities for harassment of families who are already under pressure. It introduces a 3-month notice period before a bank moves to seek a repossession order, or 8 months for new arrears cases. Now, whatever about kicking the can down the road, this is certainly acting with indecent haste. I think this code of conduct is best understood as part of a wider and coordinated attack on struggling homeowners. You've already passed legislation making it easier to repossess family homes. Indeed, you've taxed the family home. And now, at the behest of the Troika, you introduce this new code of conduct, which ignores many of the advices given by organisations that work with struggling homeowners. So, Minister, tell us how you explain to those families with whom you have sympathised this morning here, explain to them the difference in treatment between the macho men of the banking world and the struggling householder.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
I find your comments interesting because your predecessor as a spokesperson on finance in this House discussed with me at length why the Labour Party was voting against the bank guarantee. I advised him to consider doing the same, and he didn't or wouldn't. I don't quite know why, but all I can say is that when it comes to matters of banking, of families, of lives of people who are worried about holding on to their house, I think what you need to do, Deputy, is think a little bit about what the structures are that the government has put in place. I agree with you, the country should never have been brought to this point, but your party, among all the other parties, voted for the guarantee, and you have resiled from that position ever since. But the record of the House shows differently. Now, what we have to do, given the catastrophe that was visited on this country and on the people of this country, and given the fact that the guarantee handed responsibility for the awful, irresponsible actions that we hear on the tapes, the men after the mullah, as you've said yourself, we were handed that responsibility as citizens and a country by those who voted for the bank guarantee, including yourselves. So if there's responsibility to be taken by everybody, everybody includes yourselves. You are leading lights in it. Now, just let me say this. In relation to the families, what we have set up...
Do you have any idea? Do you have any idea how you sound on radio and television? Would you please allow the Minister to respond without your smart remarks?
What we have set up is a process, and for anybody who has ever been involved in debt resolution, Deputy, and I'm speaking now as an accountant, you have to get the borrower and the lender to come together and to reach an agreement which allows the borrower to recover, puts them back up on their feet, but also allows the lender to recover proportionate amounts of money that are recoverable. And just let me say that if you go into the detail of the Central Bank Code of Conduct, you will find that it makes reference to not excessive and proportionate contact. And I think, again, anybody, even at a domestic level, who's ever been owed money by somebody, does know that people find the stress so much they kind of turn away, they don't engage. And what we are providing for is an engagement process that will allow families to reach a sustainable solution. To be honest, anything else that you're holding out, that there can't be an actual resolution between the borrower and the lender, I don't think you wish it so, but I actually think you're making a false promise to people that is not deliverable, because at the end of the day, we have to slowly but surely help families to sort out their difficulties. We now have the structures in place. As I said, my own department, we provide support on a monthly basis to 12,000 families in terms of their mortgage interest payments. We also provide a telephone advice line run through Citizens Information. We also provide and fund the money advice and budgeting service. The Government and the Dáil has recently established the Insolvency Service of Ireland. We now have the structures in place which allow for families to actually come to a sustainable resolution in relation to their debt. That's what I want for the families. I hope that that's what Sinn Féin wants.
Deputy MacDonald, 1 minute, thank you.
Well, certainly, Minister, you are an accountant, and if ever I heard one, that was an accountant's answer. We all know that there has to be a resolution process for families in debt. That has never been contested. But what you are proposing here is a process that allows a veto to the banks. That's what you're doing. It's not a level playing pitch for the struggling household and the macho men, many of whom are still in place, let it be said, within the financial system, the moolah boys, versus the struggling householder. That's not even-handed. That's not fair. So can I tell you, you may revisit your accountant's mindset and perhaps factor that in. Tell me, how is it that you, above all people who's forever telling us how right you were on the banks, why is it then that you let the Anglo boys, who treated the state with such contempt, you left them in position for 5 years after the guarantee on salaries of $175,000 and more? You preside over a situation where none of these moolah men have been brought to account. Not one of them has faced time in jail. You certainly don't have a charter for harassing them. One law for the rich and another for the poor. So, you polish your halo, Minister, on the banks.
Please put your question. You're over
But that
time.
only makes what you're doing at this point in time all the worse. You've protected these people.
You didn't hear me, Deputy. Put your question,
positions. And at the same time, your response to the plight of struggling homeowners has been, I believe, heartless. Last week, you know, the figure...
Deputy, I ask you again, will you put your question, please? Thank you.
In a row since September 2009 of people in arrears. And this has happened on your watch.
Sorry, Deputy, would you please resume your seat? Minister, would you respond to the Deputy? You're now a minute over your time.
Minister, I wish you to afford me the same courtesy. I wish you to afford me the same courtesy.
I also gave you latitude.
I wish to put my question.
Well, put your question, please.
So where did it all go so horribly wrong, Minister? Since when do you bank back the big bankers and punish
Will you please
families?
adhere to the chair?
Is that now the way of Labour and their accountant, Minister?
Minister, you have 1 minute, thank you, and please stick.
Well, I doubt if any accountant in Ireland knows as much about banks and banking as Sinn Féin and certain elements of it do. You have a relationship. You have had a relationship with banks and bank moolah, which fades into comparison with any knowledge that any of the rest of us have. So please, don't make, if you like, I think it's unbecoming to just let something that is so important to families to generate. I think it's unworthy of you, and it's not your normal standard to make those kind of comments. Just let me say this: where you asked one question, Deputy, where did it all go wrong? It went wrong, unfortunately, for this country on the night of the bank guarantee, when the decision was made, by yourselves included, to transfer the debt to the backs of the Irish people. And that is why, when we listen to those tapes, it is actually so tragic and sad that in the 3 years after the bank guarantee, this country lost 250,000 jobs. What's the connection of that to your question? It's because many of those families are the families who are today struggling to meet their mortgages. What have we done as a government? We are setting, and we have set up, a procedure to actually find a resolution.
Sorry, Minister, would you please finish up? Thank you.
To find a resolution between the borrower and the land.
Deputy Daly. Deputy Daly, thank you. Deputy Daly. Would you please, Deputy McLaughlin, would you please?
Thanks, Count Corla. I'm sure, Minister, that you do appreciate how sickened people are by what you call the vampire tapes. But I wonder, could you also appreciate that really the questions people have is not about who said what to who, about whether politicians were just incompetent or incompetent and corrupt. The real question that people have is, what are you going to do about it? And to be honest with you, slagging off Fianna Fáil and waffling on as the Taoiseach did here for the last 2 days really isn't going to cut it. You might be interested to know that there are 26 members of the Czech Republic Parliament in custody at the moment for crimes of a less serious character than what went on in Ireland 5 years ago. 5 years ago, the banking crime of the century, the theft of billions from men, women and children in this country, and nothing has been done. And the Taoiseach told us yesterday, it takes time. We're preparing a book of evidence. The exact same line that was given 2 years after the crisis. It's utter nonsense. What other crime would be treated in this way? Where is the fraud squad? Where is the Criminal Assets Bureau? This is what they were set up for. Any other crime scene would have been surrounded and the evidence taken. It was 6 months before they made a visit to Anglo, 2 years before they even got the passwords. And the reason why it's different is that there's a different attitude to crimes committed by people in suits. They're not considered to be real crimes. Also, of course, the fear that if they had gone in, it might have revealed a connection to the political establishment. Now we have a scenario where we're expected to believe that a newspaper whose owner this time last year took Sean Fitzpatrick to the European Championships and then quashed those photographs from being printed are now at the forefront of investigative journalism. We're expected to believe that the Garda Commissioner, who we know has a legal responsibility under the Garda Síochána Act to inform the Minister of serious matters of public interest, didn't inform the Minister about these very serious tapes, and yet they ended up in the hands of one of the Guards' favourite sources of information. The greatest challenge is we are expected to believe there's something unusual here. There's nothing unusual here, Minister. The only thing unusual is the scale of the arrogance, the scale of the delays and the scale of the inaction. What I want to ask you, Minister, are two questions. These are crimes. Why are the people who committed them not in jail? And if you, who are in power, say that our laws are inadequate, what are you doing about them? We've heard a lot from the Labour Party how you haven't voted for the bank guarantee. You voted for every other cut to pay for it. There is 25 billion in bonds in the
Deputy, would you please resume the
on behalf of the government to cover the promissory notes. What I'm asking you, Minister, is that we know that once issued, this becomes sovereign debt. Given the fact that it has been revealed that this decision was made on misinformation, will you now commit to cancelling and not paying those bonds and making the Irish people pay for the crimes of others?
Now, I want to be quite clear about this. We've now got into a habit. It's now nearly 11:05. There's 2 minutes to ask a question and 3 minutes to answer it, and 1 minute for a supplementary. I'm going to start sticking to that rigidly. Now, I'm switching off the microphones if you don't adhere to the rules. On both sides, yes. So will you please adhere to the rules? Minister, you have 3 minutes to reply. Thank you. Well, I'll do the chair if you don't mind, Deputy McGrath.
First of all, let me say, I think that going on what happened on a previous occasion, Deputy, I think we all have to be very circumspect in what we actually say in here in relation to matters which are due, I understand, and I hope to come before the courts, as I understand it, early next year. And I think it is right and proper that people who have been involved in what has happened to this country, this major disaster, should come before our courts. And I do not think that anything should be said here that would jeopardise the courts dealing in their proper way with those matters. Secondly, I want to say that in relation to what happened and the tapes that are now being disclosed, we have legislation here before the Dáil as we speak, which is in relation to the powers of the Oireachtas to carry out investigations. Now, again, just let me say, we've had no less than 4 scoping inquiries, first by Klaus Regling, the second one by Patrick Honohan, the Governor, the third one by NIBARC, and we also had a fourth inquiry into the functioning of the upper echelons of the public service in the context of the events that had happened, carried out by experts from Canada. Now, I think that we actually, in fact, have had a great deal of inquiry and investigation into what happened. And I think what is important is that we should be able, with all of that material that's available, to proceed to an appropriate inquiry. In relation, though, to people being arraigned before the courts, obviously, the operation of the justice system and the prosecutorial system in Ireland is properly independent of the government of the day. But I can say to you that the Gardaí and the prosecution authorities have, via the Attorney-General and via the Minister for Justice, indicated that it is expected that the prosecutions will be underway in court in the new year.
Thank you. Deputy Daly, 1 minute. Thank you.
I think, Minister, I have to say it's utter nonsense, your point about due process or the system being potentially tainted. There are facts here. Laws were broken. This criminal activity happened, and those who are responsible for it haven't been brought to book. And I don't think that the people out there are interested in Oireachtas inquiries. The critical thing, actually, that they're interested in, that those responsible would be brought to account, firstly, but more importantly, that everybody else who was paying the price for their crimes would be released from that life sentence. And you, unlike what you did in the past when you were in opposition, have an opportunity to do that now. What I am asking you is, why are you asking the Irish people, forcing the Irish people to pay for the crimes of these bankers while they walk free? You have the power to cancel the bonds that are under the central bank. Let the ECB take a hit rather than special needs assistance, rather than parents, rather than mortgage holders. The choice is now with you, and harking back to the past won't cover you on this one.
Minister.
For the record again, can I say that there were a number of occasions in this House when there were comments which were made in this House by previous office holders, which seriously jeopardised, if in fact not totally prevented, prosecutions which might otherwise have been undertaken. I think it's important, Deputy, that you do acknowledge that there is an independent justice system, an independent judiciary and an independent prosecution system. Just let me say in relation to what I said in opposition, Deputy, because I'm very clear about what I said in opposition. I said that the arrangements which were made would have to be renegotiated, and I specifically set out how the promissory note and the other arrangements could be renegotiated. Unfortunately, once a guarantee is given by a sovereign, unless the sovereign totally defaults, there is no way of repudiating a guarantee. Now, if you're suggesting that this country should have defaulted and the country be plunged into total penury, well, if that's your solution, it's not one that I share.
Thank you. That completes the Leader's question.